Hello, friends, and welcome back to r/ProRevenge. Today, we have another set of great stories about crazy people and their revenge. But before we start, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. And our first story is, Fire Me for BS Reason? Get ready to pay up. I used to work at a distribution warehouse, and last summer I got stress and depression that was so bad I got anxiety attacks because of it from the bad work environment. It was mainly caused by a specific employee and the CEO. I was having way more sick days than before and got asked for a doctor's note in a meeting between me, the CEO, and the guy who basically ran the company. He was great and seemed concerned about me, while the CEO seemed more annoyed that my sick days were higher than normal for me. We filled out the part of the doctor's note that's supposed to be filled by the employee and the company in collaboration, and I booked an appointment with my doctor. He concluded that I had stress and depression, recommended that I was allowed small breaks for fresh air, very bad air quality in the warehouse, and that I went down from 35 hours a week to 20. He also recommended I get therapy. The bill got sent directly to the company, as if they request one, they're the ones to pay per law. I was pretty wound up after the appointment and called them and explained the bill was being sent to them, and I felt bad after, so I would be taking the rest of the day. It was about 2 hours before I usually got off, and I'd worked before the appointment. They were very understanding and nice. The next day, I was working and talked with the guy I mentioned that actually mainly ran the place about the doctor's note. I'll refer to him as Cedric from now on, because he's nice and a friendly person. Yeah, that's a Harry Potter reference. We agreed that I would have an extra day off so that I only worked 2 days in a row between days off, that I would have a longer lunch break to make the math add up, and that I would come in later, which was my idea, as I know that's when they're most busy, which I pointed out to him. The CEO wasn't part of it because he wasn't in that day. So the next Thursday, I get called into a meeting with both of them again for Friday. I assume it was to talk about how it worked this last week with my adjusted schedule and maybe change it slightly. The CEO was his normal unpleasant self, and Cedric seemed unusually silent and uncomfortable. The CEO went through the doctor's note with me, saying he didn't understand the part about fresh air. I explained and told him how I felt the new schedule had worked, how much better it already seemed to be for me, despite the only thing having been put in was me having Wednesday off. He then slid a piece of paper across the desk to me and informed me I was being fired. I was shocked. Read the paper, though, and signed it since there was nothing else I could do. I was given my copy of it, and then they walked me to the warehouse where it was announced to the others. My boss was just as shocked as me and angry because she liked me and had not been informed. I went home after that. I contacted my union, sent them the copy I had, a copy of my contract, and explained the timeline. I wasn't working since that day because F them, TBH. I only came back shortly one day to give back my key and uniform and say goodbye to people. I was put on as CC on every email the union employee that worked my case sent to them, and he sent every email the union lawyer sent him to me. Well, a lot of things happened through them that I won't write out in detail, but here are the bullet points. I hadn't actually been given a proper letter of termination. While the one I was given was legally binding, it wasn't actually correctly made. My assignments had slowly changed, but my contract hadn't and was now wrong. This meant that instead of 1 month severance, I was entitled to 3. And as this was agreed on after the 1 month was started, they were put on that after giving me 4 months of severance pay. Since they didn't actually have a reason to fire me, it was unreasonable dismissal, legal term translated. We could either get a settlement or take them to court. Since my union is one of the biggest here and quite strong, and the CEO realized that he knew nothing about it, he hired an attorney. Very expensive, and the company wasn't going very well. The settlement was negotiated between my union and the attorney, and I was then given the choice of either accepting or taking them to court. Through a conversation with the union advisor working my case, I decided to agree to it. The company's attorney was being very slow to sign it, so it would be closed. I suspect the CEO told him to, due to having to pay it the next payday after it was signed by everyone. Me, the union employee working my case, the union's lawyer, the CEO, and the company's attorney. And as I mentioned, the company wasn't doing great. They had actually lost a customer the day before I was fired. In the end, I got paid to be at home for 4 months and got a pretty decent-sized settlement for the unreasonable dismissal and the contract not being updated. The CEO also had to state that my position in the company had been dismantled and the assignments had been spread between several employees. This was all mainly because my work had changed so much, I'd basically become assistant manager. Moral of the story: be in a union, have them check your contract, and make sure your contract isn't outdated compared to what you do. Unions for the employee, HR for the company. And our second story. Make my life at work miserable? You'll never work again with me. I used to work at a medium-sized services company and had recently been moved to a smaller branch office with a nice pay raise. I was basically my own team and got to do interesting work on a large project. Since they were satisfied with the work but needed it done on a larger scale, the company hired another person to help me. Meet Fred. I knew Fred from outside work through common relationships and didn't find him any weirder than other nerdy people in the business. Oh boy. Fred was good at technical work, very good. When it came to human interactions, though, it was something else. Fred thought of me as his only friend in the workplace and would bitch all day long about all the other colleagues who were all equally incompetent, weird, evil, and generally deserving of his scorn. Fred had a terrible tendency of telling other people we had to work with that they were doing things wrong and that their software was crap, which was often technically right, but completely forgetting the constraints in which other people had to work, and that there might have been reasons for things that now sounded awful, which is basically always the case. People resented both of us as a team for things he said, and some situations became entrenched. It was getting harder every day for me to get to work. Eventually, he made a lot of enemies, and he got a meeting with the division director. It only lasted for a few minutes, during which he told the boss of 800 people that he was an evildoer. It was his last day in the company. I worked alone from that time and managed to finish most of the project, smoothing things over with other teams. A few months later, I got an offer for the job of my dreams in a huge utility company. After starting the work, guess who I discover working here as a contractor under my direct supervision? Fred. Fred looked so happy to find a friend again. He spent most of my first day at work telling me how the company was awful, everyone was dumb, and everything was insufferable. I went home that night feeling horrible, wondering how much of what he told me was true and how bad it would be to work there. Turns out, after a few hard starting days, it really was the job of my dreams. Acting now with Fred as a client and not a colleague, I managed to keep him in check and to improve a lot of the perceived quality of the team's work. Prior to my hiring, Fred was basically telling people to F off whenever they were asking him things he didn't want to work on. Having someone who could see through his bullcrap to manage him got the roadmap back on track. Eventually, I learned that my colleagues had been very wary about working with me at the beginning because Fred had been bad-mouthing me from the day he learned I'd been hired to manage him. This had made the first weeks difficult until they understood he'd been lying about it all. About 2 years later, I was now team manager, and my boss comes to my office and asks me about a hiring issue. There's a new position in the team, and the recruiter asked him about someone with excellent technical skills, but who sounded very arrogant. Guess who wanted to work as my colleague again? If you followed the story, you got it right. I didn't let out to my boss the slightest bit of resentment. I explained to him how he was a very competent person, but he might just lack the skills required for our company's teamwork. I knew exactly what I had to say for my boss to never want to hire him ever without making it about our personal history. I only told what happened to a close coworker, and he sounded very thankful to hear that he would not have to work with Fred as a colleague. A few months later, his company lost the contract, and Fred was hired by the new contractor. However, they were not as lenient with him as the previous company was, and another few months later, I was finally Fred-free. Last I heard of him, he was working at a Silicon Valley giant on a project that was in a worldwide media crapstorm over technical issues. I kept wondering whether he was telling everyone else in his team how bad at their jobs they were and how much he contributed to that massive failure. And our last short story. Take my parking spot that I just dug out? Fine, I'll bury your car. This happened a couple years ago. It had snowed a bunch, so I went out to clear a spot for my boyfriend at the time for when he got home from work, police officer. I spent a while digging it out, and as I was finishing up, some girl drove up and parked in it while I was still shoveling it. I told her that I just dug it out intending to use it and asked her to move. She didn't. She then got out of her car and walked away. Turns out she lived 2 buildings down, so she normally wouldn't park there anyway. Our complex had a mini snowplow, and the dude was plowing in the area and saw all this go down. He helped me move all the snow from the pile he just created and put it around her car. We buried it up to the door handles on all sides. He then dug out a new spot for me. Saw her later trying to dig out her car. Turns out she didn't have a shovel. So naturally, because I'm petty, I went out and re-shoveled the sidewalk from the lot up to our building and threw all the snow on her vehicle while I did. Then went inside and took my shovel with me. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.